On January 15th, 2025, the United States Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in a case called Free Speech Coalition v. Paxton. This case will determine the fate of 19 state laws protecting children from access to online pornography through mandatory age verification requirements. Most children are first exposed to pornography when they are somewhere between 7 and 13 years old, and by the time they are 18, most of them have seen it. This case is historic, but for far more than just this reason. Pornography is the marketing arm of the sexual revolution, and has been since that revolution got going in the 1960s. Now, the Supreme Court could rule in June that states have the right and duty to protect children from the harms of pornography. Such a ruling would unseat the ethics of the sexual revolution from its place in the minds of most people as the primary lens through which they think about and engage in physical intimacy. In this series, we will explore the broken promises and heartbreaking results of the sexual revolution, primarily through the internet, and thereby gain a better understanding of just how much is at stake in this historic case. I'm Joseph Kohm. I'm the Policy Director of Family Policy Alliance, and you're listening to a podcast from Family Policy Alliance. Joining me today to begin talking about this issue from one of 4 different angles is a great guest we have joining us, a great ally of Family Policy Alliance, and her name is Helen Taylor from Exodus Cry. Helen Taylor is the Vice President of Impact for Exodus Cry, which is an international organization committed to abolishing sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. But I'm going to let her talk more about Exodus Cry. I want to get her on here to actually start talking about it. So Helen, just thank you so much for joining us. You're such a valuable ally to us here at FPA, and we're so honored to have you on.
Oh, thanks so much, Joseph. It's great to be working with you on this mission for this cause. And it's been a real all hands on deck couple of years with working around the issue of age verification and raising awareness about pornography. And so, really grateful for you furthering the conversation and having me on your podcast today.
Absolutely. Well, we're the ones honored to have you and to work alongside you, as you said. I'm sure we'll talk about that here before this episode is over. But, Helen, we value you all because you and the team at Exodus Cry are who we consider the very best advocates for victims and survivors of sex trafficking around the world. So I think we should start by, I'd like you to just tell us, how did you get into this? Well, what touched your heart to speak up for these victims around the world?
I was at university in the UK when I heard the founder of Exodus Cry. His name is Benji Nolo. And I heard him speaking about child sex trafficking in Cambodia. This is back in 2007. And I just began sobbing and weeping. And for the next 3 hours, could not stop crying. I felt like my heart was breaking within me. I don't think I've ever cried so much about an issue that I only really just found out about. And I think even tracing back years before then, I'd always had a real deep value for human dignity, human life, women knowing that their value. And once I got lost when I was about 16 years old in London and found myself in this alleyway that I could see a peep show, a strip club, and a sex shop, all in this little pocket of Soho in London. And there was this woman standing in the doorway, one of these buildings, in this red dress. And I quickly connected the dots and realized that she was in prostitution and that this was a establishment that was selling sex. And she looked Russian or Eastern European to me. And I felt this tremendous anger on her behalf. Like, the thought that crossed my mind immediately was, what kind of society are we that we allow vulnerable women to be in this situation that's it's clear as day? The dynamic, the power dynamic is between one person who has money and wants the sexual experience to rent out someone's body or to purchase their sexual consent, and a vulnerable person who does not desire them, has maybe zero feelings of sexual attraction or love or any kind of mutuality or agency necessarily, and they are being rented in this position. And I didn't even know back then about third parties, pimps, trafficking, any of the coercive dynamics that we now know most commonly take place in prostitution. But just from a very basic human level, it seemed a very unequal sexual dynamic to me, and just so transactional, so cold, so devoid of the respect and dignity that she deserved. And the thought that went through my head in that moment was, I just want to give this woman a rose and just tell her that I see her and that she is worthy and beautiful. And I'd never heard of people giving roses to those in the sex industry. And it's really beautiful in a way that all these years later, I get to give not only roses, but care packages to women exploited in prostitution and trafficking, not just across the States, but around the world. I've done this work in over 20 countries to date, been to some of the darkest red light districts that you could possibly imagine, seen some of the most just horrific situations up close. But as a 16-year-old, that encounter impacted me so deeply. And so just a few years later, to find out that this was happening on a global scale, not only with adult women, but with children, and that it was often Western men traveling to these impoverished countries, seeking out children to purchase them for sex, to purchase their virginity. I think it was one of those moments, and you know, William Wilberforce, who's, I know, one of our shared heroes, talks about how he prayed he never recovered from this wound. And for me, that was a wound from God's own breaking heart about this issue. And I actually moved to Cambodia. I did a trip shortly after that. And then after university, I trained as an art therapist, moved to Cambodia. And it was while I was living there in 2011 and 12 that Benji, the man who I first heard speaking about this all those years before, made this documentary, Nefarious Merchant of Souls. And we screened that at our house in Cambodia. And long story short, less than a year later, I moved to work for Exodus Cry to help them build their outreach department. And that was almost 12 years ago. So, and I know you saw Nefarious and were very impacted as well. You've told me, Joseph.
Yes, I have. Boy, what a powerful origin story that is, Helen, that could only have been orchestrated by God. And I'm grateful on behalf of our audience to you for sharing it with us. And it's so appropriate for what we're going to dive into right now with the majority of this podcast. Because you're right, I did see Nefarious Merchant of Souls at the home of my internship supervisor while I was in law school. I was just a rising two-year law or second-year law student. I was at Regent University Law School, and I was doing an internship that was opposing human trafficking in Jakarta, Indonesia. And I'll never forget now your boss, Benji Nolo, narrating that episode by saying that if we're going to change the way we think about pornography and sex trafficking, we have to change the way we think about prostitution. So we're here on this episode, Helen, to make the case that pornography and sex trafficking and prostitution are all actually the same industry. I want you to, because this is what you do best, explain to our audience exactly how those are interwoven. How is pornography related to the sex industry, to prostitution, and to sex trafficking?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can identify maybe 5 ways on this podcast, but there are more ways than this. And probably for me, the first time that I made that direct link was when I was working in Cambodia. One of the girls in my art therapy program was sharing her story with me, and she told me that age 11 she had been trafficked from a rural village in Cambodia into the city, and throughout her teenage years, while being trafficked as a minor in a brothel in the big city, the capital city of Cambodia, she had Western men show her pornography on DVD back at that time, but also on tablets, and get her to copy and reenact their fantasy. And for me, that was such an obvious anecdotal story, but was the story for many girls, that the sex buyers didn't just pop up out of nowhere with no prior fantasy. Now, we know that not every person who watches porn or is addicted to porn becomes a sex buyer, but we, Exodus Cry, have just completed a documentary called Buying Her that will be coming out next year. And every single sex buyer, former sex buyer we interviewed for this documentary, their journey all began as a child who was exposed to pornography and that long-standing addiction. We know that when it comes to pornography, the desire for an equal or greater dopamine hit seeks novel content, different. It often takes the viewer into darker and darker areas, sometimes involving minors, sometimes involving extreme violence. And then beyond wanting to just watch this on a screen, but actually act out this fantasy with a real human. And the first way that we clearly see pornography and trafficking interwoven is that trafficking wouldn't exist without the demand for paid sex. Sometimes we say this statement that if all men stopped buying women and children in sex trafficking today, trafficking would end today. Now, I know that that's not going to happen overnight, and it's possibly a long journey and road to get to that point as a culture and society where we say it is not okay for money and sex to go together. Money is inherently evidence of coercion. But we see that demand doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is often the end result of a long-standing pornography addiction. Pornography is the marketing force. It is the fuel. It is the fantasy that is marketing trafficked individuals. And so just on a very practical level, if we trace demand, we have to look at where it starts. So the first way I would say is it creates a market and a demand for real sex trafficking victims, like the teenage girl I worked with in Cambodia, but girls all across America who are being trafficked as well. The second thing that we saw up close is that we made a 3-part documentary called Beyond Fantasy, where we examined some of the coercive ways that women are trafficked into porn. And we interviewed a lot of porn directors and producers, and they told us some very nefarious and wrong ways that they coerce girls to sign contracts. Sometimes a girl will sign a contract, but then the actual pornography that she's having to make is far more extreme, far different, things that she did not consent to. One director told us in the interview, I want to capture her shock and her pain. I want to figure out ahead of time what her boundary line is, and then in the video while the camera's on, smash that line. And he compared it to a violent sport. And so these are the kind of people who are producing pornography. Some of them are complete sociopaths who sometimes have gone to prison. Some of them are extremely violent, and we interviewed some who create pornography that is the fantasy of a child, and ask them, so what's the youngest that you ethically feel it's okay to portray a girl looking like? Because remember, they are portraying them with pigtails and lollipops, braces on their teeth, teddy bears. There's a whole genre called barely legal pornography that's now often referred to teen porn. Teen porn is the #1 search consistently in pornography. And so there's a pedophilic fantasy being marketed through porn, but even just the practical ways that girls are coerced into porn. I personally had a porn director tell me that he believes that a lot of porn agents are actually pimps, and they're bringing them girls sometimes from Eastern Europe, from Russia, from Thailand, or from communities in America that are, girls who experience more vulnerabilities than a typical girl. I've spoken to women who enter the porn industry with extreme mental health disabilities. I can't see, I don't believe that I was consenting in any of the videos. I wasn't in my right mind to be able to give consent. So many girls, the girls that are in porn are on drugs. And so if you analyze, under the legal definition of human trafficking, there has to be proven elements of force, fraud, or coercion, or if they're under 18. So even if a girl is, universally, anyone under 18, that is classified as child pornography, CSAM material, we as a society we know that is wrong, that is illegal. The gray area is when girls are over 18 and they're being paid to be in porn. It's often harder for the public to sympathize with them. But having made this documentary, having seen the coercive ways that girls are enticed into porn and the things that they are demanded to do on set, you just understand this industry in a much more predatory way. Then there were instances of this popular Pornhub channel called Girls Do Porn, where there was drugs and alcohol on set, where a lot of the girls showed up thinking that they were doing just regular modeling videos, and there was all kinds of coercion and blackmail taking place in order to force them to do pornography, and that they were told if they didn't go through with this, that their family would be made aware of this, all kinds of shame-filled tactics. And that did result in a criminal case, a criminal indictment of the individual who was behind that. And so that leads me to the third intersection we see between trafficking and porn. That at Exodus Cry, we began noticing a few years ago, back in 2019, these different cases pop up in the media of the website Pornhub. Now, at the time, Pornhub was very much acceptable in pop culture. Musicians like Kanye West had hosted their awards. They had billboards in Times Square, a pop-up show in Times Square. They partnered with New York Fashion Week. And they, in most people's minds, would have been thought of as this is a porn site that's above board and not a shady site. Well, we were coming across cases like this 15-year-old who was missing and trafficked was found in 58 videos on Pornhub. And the question then rose, well, how was it that a trafficker was able to upload videos of a minor and this wasn't flagged by Pornhub at all? 58 videos. She's missing, she's trafficked. Well, that led us to really explore and investigate how are these porn videos vetted and how are they uploaded, only to realize all you really need is an email address to be able to upload a video on a porn site like Pornhub that operates as like a YouTube of porn. Much of it is user generated that's uploaded. At the time, there were 13 million videos on Pornhub. And we basically made the case that if they are not properly verifying even basic age and consent of these videos, how many videos are of underage girls, of rape victims, of trafficking victims, are non-consenting videos when there's tags saying rape or non-consensual or drugged, or these tag words that imply non-consent? How is anyone to know whether that's acting or whether it's real? And the horrifying truth that we uncovered in 2020 on a widespread way was that a lot of these videos were of real victims, and we had the real victims contact us. So we began connecting them with lawyers. We began this big campaign called Trafficking Hub that ended up even expanding into this global movement where other organizations came on board. And as a collective, there was a collective outcry of this website, the most famous in the world, that's owned by another company that owned about 70 to 90% of all online porn sites, have zero ethics when it comes to vetting of this. So we campaigned really hard all year, as did many other groups and who got involved in support. And it was incredible to see finally the New York Times reach out. They wanted to do their own investigation as well. And the result of that being on the front page in December 2020, and many listeners will probably even remember that article, The Children of Pornhub, by Nick Kristof. As a result, all the major credit card companies cut ties with Pornhub, and they had to delete 10 million videos, 80% of their website a few days later. And in a statement, they blamed Exodus Cry, Trafficking Hub, and Nicosia as well. And I screenshotted that, like, wow, they've just given us the credit for all of these exploitative videos being removed. So the distribution side of pornography is often real trafficking victims in these videos. And then we did a survey a few years ago. We had over 1,000 individuals respond asking, in what ways has pornography harmed you? So many of the tragic stories related to pornography being used to groom them in their own childhood sexual abuse and molestation that they experienced. So they were shown pornography by another adult or teenager to show them that this is normal, and it was to water down their perception of what was appropriate between children, between an adult and a child, and was used to groom them, which is a really tragic, really tragic aspect of how porn is used. And the fifth way that I would just say porn and trafficking connect is that the porn industry in itself is harming and grooming children, often again children are exposed to pornography accidentally online. They're not even looking for it. Pornography is finding them, which is one of the reasons we're so passionate about passing age verification to protect children who are innocently being exposed to this addictive, harmful material. In our perspective, it's the equivalent of a heroin drug dealer going to elementary school playgrounds and injecting children. If this was happening in real time, in the real world, can you imagine the absolute uproar from parents? How dare this drug dealer be allowed? The schools opening the gates to let this drug dealer inject our own children with one of the most addictive substances that we know. But this is happening every day on the internet. Children are being exposed to one of the most addictive, both mentally and physically, material. Before they even understand what is taking place, their bodies and minds are responding to this material. And for many people, they don't talk about it. It becomes this hidden, secret, shame-filled addiction that they struggle with for years, and it harms their mental health. It harms their relationships. I personally had a 15-year-old boy say to me not long ago that every hour throughout his school day, he would have to go to the bathroom and masturbate and watch pornography on his phone. And he just said, it's ruining my life, but I don't know what to do because it's like I'm carrying the drug in my pocket at all times. How do I get free from this? And there are so many connections and ways that porn and trafficking and exploitation overlap. We are very interested in going to the root of the root. And so if men purchasing women and children for sex is at the root of trafficking, well, what's at the root of their story? Well, if all of these men were exposed to pornography as children, if we want to combat sex trafficking, we have to go after the root of the root. And so this is thinking big picture, this is thinking long term, but the statistics that we all hear on how many women and children who are being trafficked around the world are astronomical. They are in the tens of millions. And so we absolutely need, as a collective society, to stand up, shift gears, and take back ground that the internet, a city without walls, has completely is distributing this harmful, addictive, violent content that is sometimes even illegal, criminal content to our most vulnerable, innocent children. And that is not okay. And that is why we're pushing back in the way that we are, both you and I together.
Yeah, well, our two organizations and those we work with are absolutely driven to that same vision. I'm so grateful for all the depth you went into with that explanation, Helen, because this is a complex thing and it's not necessarily self-evident. But I think campaigns like Trafficking Hub show that it's becoming more visible. So much of this thrives on lack of awareness, which is why awareness, I know, is one of Exodus Cry's primary purposes for what you do, is just to make awareness of it. So it's a sign of that, and it's a sign that when people do start thinking about it, it does really start to make sense. I think this is evidenced on the back end too, because I know we've both talked to men, especially who, but people, men and women who, when they were regular pornography users, but once they discover this link that their viewership directly helps generate the enslavement of another human being, that's where it ends for them. That's what's able to be at least a catalyst in the end of their addiction, because they know that every time they log into Pornhub, someone is paying for that in their oppression, in their trafficking. And thank God that there are people who are still feeling and empathetic enough to let that be the thing that causes them to get help and get over pornography, which is why it's so important to tell these stories. And that's what I think I'm going to ask you to do next, Helen, because you've done so much counseling of victims and survivors, and you do such a great job telling their stories. I know in this case before the court, you guys have done an amicus brief where you're telling some of these stories, which is so good for the justices on the court to be considering as they're reviewing this case. So I'm just wondering if you could maybe illustrate this connection between pornography and the trafficking industry with maybe one or two stories of survivors that you'd be willing to share with us.
Yeah. Well, I will always remember a line that this girl called Rose Kalemba, who was gang raped at knife point when she was 14 years old. Someone had taken a video of that and uploaded it to Pornhub. Her story was reported by the BBC. It came out the day after my coworker at the time, Lila Mickelwait's op-ed that she did, calling for Pornhub to be held accountable and shut down. And Rose told me personally that she emailed Pornhub every day for about 6 months, sometimes up to 3 times a day, begging them to take down this video where she's 14 and being gang raped, and how she was completely ignored for 6 months. And it wasn't until she had the idea, I'm going to set up a different email that sounds like a lawyer name, and I'm going to pretend to be a lawyer and threaten to sue them if they don't. Like, she was absolutely desperate. And within 48 hours, they took down the content. And she used this line saying, "They immortalized my abuse." And that became something that we consistently heard from so many survivors who imagine going through the most horrific thing, being raped, being gang raped, being trafficked. And not only are you trying to heal from the trauma, the PTSD of that event, the fact that it was filmed and uploaded to a porn site that are continuing to make money off of your abuse. So they're essentially trafficking you by monetizing and promoting that video and content. And to know that people around the world, sometimes by the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, are masturbating to this content, of the worst thing that ever happened to you, the most abusive thing, it is absolutely encouraged sociopathic culture. And so I'm glad that you highlighted that point a second ago, Joseph, for people to realize that it's not always acting in these videos, that there are sometimes real victims. I mean, even pornography isn't acting, it's real sex acts taking place on the camera. But it's acting in that they're not in love, they're not enjoying the experience. It's all for the cameras and the money. Some people say that pornography is prostitution with a camera in the room, but unfortunately, the presence of that camera suddenly results in all these legal protections for an abusive, exploitative scenario taking place. And so just all the survivors, the victims who contacted us, even one who, when Pornhub took down those 10 million videos, on that day, her video was taken down. Just a few days ago, she reached out to me on Facebook telling me that someone had re-uploaded that video of hers to Pornhub. And so not only is the terror of having these videos uploaded, the terror that it causes victims, the inability to be able to heal and move on, but just knowing that at any given moment, that could be up again online forever. And so I think we really need to consider the unique dynamics taking place with these videos. I've done outreach at pornography conventions, and I'll always remember this really disturbing scenario where there was a BDSM section and they had all these leather whips on different tables, merchandise being promoted and sold. And there was a line of men lining up to test out these whips with a woman who was tied up, a naked woman, or just wearing one piece of underwear. She was tied up and her back was red raw as all these men were lining up with a handful of different whips in their hands to whip her. And I was offered, I was there doing outreach, giving a hotline number for legal services and therapy, offering prayer and a gift to every woman that we spoke with. I was offered these leather whips if I would like to test them out on this woman. And this is the kind of thing that is so normalized in the porn industry. Another girl that is a really close friend of mine said that the knowledge of these videos of her being in porn, she says, when I see these videos, I see myself being raped over and over and over again. But because she was over 18 and she did sign a consent paper at the time, even though she wasn't in her right mind mentally, it is very difficult for survivors like this to be able to get these videos down. And so that's another really hard aspect of this whole conversation, is the permanency. The internet is forever. And that's another reason why we're actually trying to raise the age of entry to porn from 18 to 21 to reduce the vulnerability of young 18-year-olds getting into this. I mean, there are so many stories that come to mind and fill my mind with this. But it's something that is extremely common with most trafficking victims. There's another way that their pimp can make money off them, by filming their videos. And so pimps often set up cameras in the brothels or the hotels. And it's another way for them to then make money off of the content of the victim that they're trafficking, is by putting it online. So there's so many interlinks and ways that exploitation is taking place. After our trafficking campaign that became this movement, we launched another campaign called Protect Children, Not Porn. At the time, we're told America will probably be the last country ever to pass age verification because of the free speech laws that the porn industry hide behind. But we began campaigning for it back in 2021. And then it was around a year or so later, the story of Billie Eilish, that pop star who she was age 11, homeschooled, was exposed to hardcore violent pornography because every single child is 2 clicks away from being exposed to this porn. It's like porn, you type any sexualized word on Google and Pornhub is one of the very first sites that comes up. And up until very recently, there wasn't even a click if your I am over 18 button. So every day, kids were getting on this site. We've heard from so many parents who are just horrified seeing the content that their kids were exposed to, really violent, really traumatizing, gang raped themed, racist, incest themed pornography. So many parents are really unaware as to what porn currently is. It is 1,000 times more violent, more degrading, more racist, more misogynistic than it was even 10, 15 years ago. And so I know that's kind of getting into the next part of our conversation, but
that's good, Helen. I mean, we're just so you and our audience knows, we're gonna do a whole episode in this series on what the research is showing about the overall harms of pornography to children and to families. So we're gonna get into that, and there's so much overlap though between this. So I'm glad you've given us a head start. Hopefully, what our audience is hearing from these stories you're telling is that, we as Americans, we do hold tightly to our free speech principles, and we do think that's objectively a good thing. And I hope what they're hearing is that you don't have to choose between free speech and pornography. Like, I think what you've described, Helen, is a long ways from what the Supreme Court wrote about when they first established pornography as being protected speech for adults. In that when they said, they know it when they see, is the famous phrase from that early jurisprudence. This is a long ways from that. It's a long ways from anything anyone thinks of when they envision pornography. And it's why, you and I are both Christians, Helen, so we know that this is also such a far cry from what God intends for sexual intimacy to be. And we are going to give the audience the case for that and the contrast with God's vision before this series is over. But you mentioned, first of all, I want to applaud you and the Exodus Cry team for those two campaigns, Trafficking Hub and Protect Children, Not Porn. Those were obviously game-changing campaigns in this whole issue and have helped set up this movement that we're a part of to at least protect children with technology. It's one of the great ironies of this development in the last 10 years is that technology is what has enabled the pornography industry to flourish, but it's also what's enabling actual protections for children who are vulnerable to this and parents who don't want their children to be seeing it. So along those lines, Helen, Exodus Cry is based there in California. You and I went to the California State House twice earlier this year to argue for one of these bills, which was a great experience. And it was fun to see people of so many diverse political backgrounds come alongside us in the State House to join us in this vision of protecting vulnerable children and empowering parents. So I want to ask you, if the Supreme Court green lights laws like these 19 state laws and establishes that states can do this to protect children, to empower parents and secure families against pornography, but what would that look like for the fight against sex trafficking overall, in the sense of what kind of positive boost would that give to our battle against human trafficking?
Yeah, well, maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I feel like our side has a very strong position and strong stand to be able to argue that it's not overly burdensome for an adult to prove their age, not even their identity. They're just having to verify their age, just like how they do in the real world. This should apply to the online world. We're just wanting some consistency with laws. And, of course, we respect adults' rights to choose to even watching harmful, degrading content. I obviously would very much encourage them to reconsider whether it is a choice that they want to do to enter any porn site, given the information that I've just shared on this podcast. But it's right now we're putting the rights of adults way over the protections of children, and it's causing harm and havoc. And we have to, like, the protection of children, it's a no-brainer that has to come first. And my hope, of course, is that all 50 states will adopt age verification. There's a lot of talk about, well, shouldn't there be better filters on devices, and shouldn't they just come with the default to have these filters? And yes, 100%. It's not age verification versus devices. It's both, and we need protections from every single angle on this issue. But porn sites shouldn't be able to just get away with not being regulated in this way. We often compare it to big tobacco, and how we're not saying you should be criminalized for smoking, but we want to raise awareness of the harms and the connections between tobacco and cancer. We wanted to be able to restrict areas where you can smoke if it's causing harms to others. Secondhand smoke harms others and children. And so your choices shouldn't be able to, your free choices, if it's causing harm to another person, then as a society, we need to reevaluate the restrictions around that free choice. And I feel really encouraged seeing, like, the campaigns around smoking in the last few years have been very effective in reducing smoking, and it's declared an all-out war against cancer. We want to see those numbers significantly drop. And just like with porn, the last 20 years have been a real social experiment with allowing the internet to freely distribute to some of the youngest members of society the most hardcore violent porn. I was actually in Hollywood, kind of undercover, at this event that the porn industry put on. It was a meeting, kind of someone told me about it because they said, I'm pretty sure this meeting is going to be about Exodus Cry, because it's all about how do we push back against these anti-trafficking organizations trying to regulate us. And so I stood at the back and I listened. It was the Free Speech Coalition were hosting it. A lot of their key members, their CEO was there. And it was a week after Louisiana had just introduced the first age verification law. And the conversation in the room, someone stood up and said, we are losing the war in this fight. We need to better educate people to think differently about our industry. They were saying we need to get young people on TikTok messaging pro-porn messages, because right now our culture is very much against us as an industry. And they were saying, how do we push back on these multi-million-dollar big organizations pushing down on our little struggling industry? And I was like, pretty sure your industry is the billion-dollar industry, and it's small non-profits that are pushing back against you guys, punching up at your powerful organization. But the response to Louisiana passing the bill was so interesting. It was, there wasn't really an acknowledgement in the room of course, we want to be protecting children. We self-label our industry an adult industry because we want it to be for adults only. They were just, how dare they regulate against us? If they try this law, it'll be another law, it'll be another law. We need to push back against this. How do we overturn it? We need to strategize. How do we overturn this age verification bill? And so that kind of told me everything I need to know, that they really don't care about children. They actually profit from children becoming lifelong subscribers. The younger the child is exposed to porn, the higher the chance of them subscribing to their websites long term. And even in that meeting in California that you and I were both at, Joseph, there were several porn producers that got in line, got on the microphone to push back against this age verification bill, and they all referenced money and how this would affect their small business. Well, their small business is actually part of a billion-dollar industry that is making so much money on sexualizing content and really shaping the way that so many young people are understanding sex and sexuality. Pornhub even created a whole sex education arm of their website. And should pornography be the way that kids learn about sex? Absolutely not. It's the worst possible way that they can learn about what sex is and what sex is really even about. And so my hope is, best case scenario, the Supreme Court deem this as constitutional, paves the way for the rest of the 50 states to introduce age verification. We see a federal level bill. Right now, the UK last year passed the Online Safety Act that's going to take go into effect this year or this next year. I know that Germany, France, Canada, Australia, Norway are all looking at age verification. And it's like, as a world, we have woken up to the fact that we can't trust the porn industry to regulate themselves. They've chosen that they will not restrict themselves, even though the technology has existed for a while to have age verification on their websites. They're choosing not to implement it. So the government has to get involved. Human rights activists have to get involved. This is probably one of the most politically unifying topics in our time right now. It's a child protection bill, and fighting human trafficking and child protection are absolutely, whatever beliefs you have on any other topic, surely as a society, we can agree that that these two things are worth fighting for, putting any kinds of other differences aside. So my hope is that this will become more and more bipartisan. We'll see more and more groups from the left really advocate for child protection in this way. I mean, in California, that rhetoric was coming forth of the amount of college students that are experiencing strangulation, like female students experiencing choking and strangulation in their sexual relationships. Some of these are causing death. There's been numerous cases of a girl being strangled to death as part of sex because of it being inspired by pornography. And so we have to be calling out these other harmful influences as well. We protested with a domestic violence organization outside the Pornhub headquarters in Los Angeles, which is now permanently closed down. Very happy to report throughout 2020. And this is another whole aspect of the harms of porn, is that it normalizes violence in sexual relationships, which should not be normalized.
Yeah, indeed. And our audience is going to hear more from a nurse practitioner guest on this show to talk about that in detail. So I appreciate the kind of preview you've given them for that, Helen. But I think it's so telling, that story after the Louisiana law. You know, we're so honored to have a good relationship with Representative Lori Schlegel there in Louisiana, who got that first bill passed. I mean, courageously. I mean, stood up to that entire billion-dollar giant of an industry and said, "Nope, you're going to heal to this." And it has worked so far. But like you said, I can add to it that that was the only one of these 19 laws that the industry has even begun to collaborate with yet. Every single other law, the porn industry, particularly Pornhub as its leader, has chosen not to collaborate with these laws, not to abide by them. They've instead blocked their service from these states in a vain attempt to try to get the laws repealed, or at least register their objection to them. And that should be so telling. What I think our audience should hear from that is this industry does not care about protecting kids, doesn't really care about protecting anyone. And by doing this, they're making a moral statement that they believe it is a positive moral good for children to be able to see pornography and to be able to see it without their parents' knowledge or consent or anything like that. They believe that is a good thing, which is why I want to congratulate you, Helen. It must have been at least a little satisfying to be in that room and to hear them so frustrated with you and the work that you're doing at Exodus Cry. You're living rent free in their heads because you're winning.
They mentioned this numerous times, and every time they said Exodus Cry, I kind of was like, "Oh, I hope no one recognizes me." But
I mean, you can judge them. You can judge people by their enemies, though. I say that as a former Army officer, and I think about, Napoleon had a bust of Lord Nelson on his mantle until he died, and it must feel really good to know not only that you're winning, you and the folks at Exodus Cry are winning against this industry, but it's bothering them. You're living rent free in their head. I mean, couldn't happen to worse people, for one thing, but it's got to make you feel just a little bit good and a little encouraged.
I feel like that meeting was more disturbing than anything, and just sad. I just felt so disappointed and sad that this is where we're at, and there's not even acknowledgement that children should be protected. They're so in their own world that porn and violent porn is normalized. That the CEO of the Free Speech Coalition, she ran one of the most hardcore violent BDSM pornography sites for many years. And I just, I know of other people in porn who said that website is considered extreme, even in the industry. And so the fact that the Free Speech Coalition are very much self-branded as this reasonable policy arm, caring about the Constitution. They really don't care about the Constitution, in my view. They care about money, and they care about money over people. And when Pornhub posted on Twitter a few years ago, still on Twitter, a baby Yoda with a reflection in his eyes saying Pornhub, and the caption was 10 minutes after my parents leave the room. It was a kind of acknowledgement of, yeah, we know young kids are watching our content, and we want to encourage them to watch it when their parents leave the room. That is so disturbing to me. We've actually had some people in the porn industry reach out and want to talk to us and actually do agree with us on some things. And my hope is that more and more people in the porn industry have an awakening through all of this to realize there's some things really not right. And our 3-part series, Beyond Fantasy, was like cutting open this glittering icing cake, exposing the live tarantulas crawling inside, like the people who are behind this industry, who are trying to market a fantasy of having sex with a 12-year-old child. We need a fresh moral reckoning on the porn industry, and it's a human rights crisis. It's a public health crisis. We don't want the porn industry to monopolize the messaging on sex and relationships, because they don't have people's interests at heart. They don't have kids' interests at heart. And so parents need to absolutely be more protective than ever over their kids, be having conversations with their kids before the porn industry does or before their peers do. And even if you're not a parent, this is something that every member of society right now should be engaging in, watching closely the Supreme Court argument, and that the nations really are watching. Like, we've had parliaments in other countries reach out to us wanting more information about how they can pass age verification in their countries. So it's really woken the world up to what is happening online and the need to protect our children. So I hope that the next few years we see a huge turnaround, and yeah, I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I think we all are, Helen. We have good reason to be, and our supporters should have good reason to be, which is why right now it's a good opportunity for me to thank them as supporters of Family Policy Alliance or Exodus Cry. You're the ones that have enabled us to get to this point, to push back against this billion-dollar, truly nefarious industry. As Helen just said, we've stepped out on the world stage now to oppose this, and our supporters have enabled us to get there. And they deserve to be thanked and applauded for it. So, Helen, just 2 more quick questions for you. I want to make sure I give you a chance to just issue a quick challenge to our audience about this. What someone's been listening for the past half hour and they're rightly incensed by everything they've heard you and I talk about. How would you challenge them to make a difference in this area?
Yeah, well, I always encourage everyone to learn more, to become more of an expert, more of an educated person, so that if this topic comes up in any setting, in your community, around your dinner table, you are armed with knowledge to be able to share with other people that really either convinces them if they have a different perspective. And so we have a documentary called Raised on Porn that you can watch on our website for free. That's all about this very issue of how pornography is harming children and what we need to do about it. We've got a book called Raised on Porn that's taking all the information that every other book under the sun has written on porn and how to understand it, how to frame it, how to get free from it. It's in one book, also called Raised on Porn. We have a petition that's for age verification that's just like a few hundred signatures away from crossing the 100,000 threshold. So sign that petition, get involved in the activism that both of our organizations are doing. From time to time, there'll be, on the state level, especially as these bills go forward in the next couple of years, we want to engage you and mobilize you to call your representatives, to write to them, and to make that as easy as possible. So, on Instagram, on X, on YouTube, stay connected with Exodus Cry, with FPA, the work that they're doing, so that you can get involved and actively push the needle on this, and maybe even do a screening of our documentary if you're wanting to educate your church or your community or your family. And obviously it kind of goes without saying, but by choosing not to watch porn, you are choosing to not support this industry in any way, even when it's free. Just the very act of going on a porn site is valuable to them, because the more clicks they have on their site, the more they can charge for ad revenue. And we want to, be educated about this whole issue, to the point where if someone mentions an article that they just read, you have an article that you can share with them. At Exodus Cry is our Instagram handle. We have many other films, Nefarious, that Joseph just mentioned, Raised on Porn, Beyond Fantasy, which is not for the faint of heart, genuinely the most disturbing documentary we've ever made on this topic. All of these films are available to watch for free. One of our films is on Netflix as well, called Liberated. And just I encourage you to become more educated, more of an expert, because we are in the process right now of shifting the needle on this whole issue. So be part of that change.
Yes, please. Your voice makes a huge difference. When Helen and I went to California to advocate for these bills, it was regular citizens standing alongside us and testifying their agreement with these bills that can make a huge difference in the minds of their representatives. So, Helen, thank you for all of that. I can't thank you enough for not just the work that you do, but for partnering with us here at Little Old FPA on this issue, and our state family policy councils. And I'll just encourage our audience, if you haven't seen their films or read their materials, they're all excellent. Nefarious had a huge impact on me personally, and I can't encourage you enough to go watch their films. They're brilliantly produced, because Benji's a great filmmaker, and you guys are best in the business at awareness of this issue. So we're so grateful. And here I'll just close our podcast by once again thanking our audience for their support that has enabled us to get to this point, from 19 state laws that have put the Supreme Court in this historic position to have to reassess some of their jurisprudence on pornography. And I'll just encourage our audience, if you haven't connected before with your state family policy council, you can find that on our website at familypolicyalliance.com/allies. These are the organizations in your state that are pushing to get a bill like these done to protect kids from pornography. And if one of these bills is coming to your state, I guarantee you'll be hearing more from people like Helen on this fight in your state house. So please go connect with your state family policy council. Thank you for your time and for listening today. Thank you for the actions we know you're going to take in response to all we've shared with you today. We pray God's blessing over you, and we'll see you next time here with Family Policy Alliance.